This will be the only video you need to watch to finally break all and every one of your bad habits. It includes a complete breakdown of all relevant scientific studies brought forward by Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist from Stanford, as well as additional systems to make sure you finally get rid of those annoying or addictive bad habits for good. So do watch the video till the end. Let's dive in. Many people want to break habits that don't serve them well. Our habits are formed through pleasure, so when we enjoy something and we do it every day, it becomes a habit. Your brain releases a chemical called dopamine whenever you engage in an enjoyable behavior. If you do something over and over again, with dopamine being present when you're doing it, it strengthens the habit even more. So when you restrain yourself from it and don't do it, dopamine creates the craving to do it again. These routines can become hardwired in our brains. Now, there are some tools that Andrew Huberman talks about for breaking habits, and it's backed up by neuroscience and psychology. But before doing that, you should be aware of the foundation practices, which are the action that establish an overall tone of your body and mind and make it less likely for you to adopt a specific bad habit. These are things like getting good amount of sleep, having quality nutrition, and having other positive routines throughout the day. All of those, of course, will support you in trying to break particular habits. This is generic advice, which you probably already know, but it had to be said for those who don't. There are several ways for ending these kind of habitual behaviors. Most of those strategies involve creating some kind of reward for not engaging in the behavior, or a punishment for engaging in it. They are pretty successful in some regards, but an issue arises when people are not closely monitored for their habit use. For instance, let's say Joe say to himself that he will not pick up his phone for 4 hours after waking up in order to get real focused work done. But he fails to do so because people generally don't monitor themselves closely enough to completely punish themselves when they breach a habit unless they have someone watching them. To put it in another way, the severity of the punishment is insufficient to break the habit, indicating just how powerful certain habits are once they become reflexive. They become very hard to override. In order to break apart neural connections that are supporting a habit that you don't want to engage in, we need to engage in a process called long-term depression, which in this case has nothing to do with a state of mental depression or a decline in mood. So how does this help? Well, if neuron A is active and neuron B is active but at a different time or outside a particular time window, then through long-term depression, the connection between neuron A and neuron B will weaken. So how do you take the two neurons that underlie a bad habit out of synchrony? It is done by bringing conscious awareness to the period immediately after doing the bad habit, and at that precise moment, capture the series of events to take advantage of the fact that the neurons responsible for creating the bad habit were active just moments earlier by engaging in a replacement behavior or a positive habit right away. Not to replace the bad habit, but doing it immediately after the bad habit execution. For example, let's say you find yourself most of the time picking up your phone while you're trying to focus on your work. You find it really distracting and you can't seem to get rid of this habit. So what seems to be very effective is to go engage in some other positive habit immediately after picking up your phone. There are two main effects of this. Firstly, in time, you begin to connect the bad habit execution with the good habit, and in doing so, you start to somewhat dismantle the sequence of firing associated with the bad behavior. You might think, why would I want to reward the execution of a bad habit with a good habit? I don't want to reward myself for the bad habit. In actuality, you're attempting to alter the nature of neural circuits that are firing so that you can rewrite the script for that bad habit and in due time get rid of this habit. Now, there's another method that the monks use and have been using to break all their bad habits. The way they break their bad behavior is simply by becoming hyper-aware of all their action. Now, what does this mean and how does this help? Well, habit is an unconscious action. When you take the action consciously, literally in your brain, it is no longer a habit. You start to use a different part of your brain, which leads you to not need much willpower to control the habit. So what you start with is doing very intentional usage of the bad habit. Let's say you want to stop your addiction to eating donuts. So what you do is not resist your urge the next time you want to eat one. You give in to it, but give in to it with full awareness. Pay attention to what this craving looks like. How do you want your donut to taste? Is your mouth watering when you eat the donut? Do you enjoy it? What happens to the desire after? You engage with the donuts with full awareness. Therefore, what you're doing is cultivating awareness rather than self-control or strengthening your willpower. You're no longer using your habit circuitry when you do an action with awareness. Instead, your habit circuitry is being gradually chipped away. Right now, whenever we try to control a behavior, a frontal lobe located in the brain is trying to control or restrain that habit. Therefore, the main issue with breaking bad habits is that there is a very small and short connection link between the frontal lobes and the habit circuitry. This means it requires a lot of energy or willpower to control and regulate that kind of habit. But when you do something with total awareness, you're increasing the size of the connection between the frontal lobe and your habit circuitry, which in turn leads you to not need much willpower or energy to break a habit. But the problem most people face is that when they fail to control the habit a few times, they just give up and stop. The goal is to stay consistent with the practice, as strengthening that connection takes time. So even if you screw up, it's not a big deal. Just wake up the next day and cultivate more awareness. Now let's move on to additional things you can do to support and enhance the tools we talked about earlier. Firstly, you need to have a powerful reason for why you're making this new change in your life. If you don't have a deep and profound reason in your life, it will become quite difficult to break a habit. For example, let's say person A wants to quit drinking alcohol for good, and his reason for doing it is simply because he just wants to do it. Now person B also wants to quit drinking alcohol for good, but his reason for quitting is because he wants to save his family and want to keep them together and not fall apart. Between the two, who is more likely to stick with it? The answer should be pretty obvious. A powerful reason or a why is what will help you keep going when things get tough, when things get hard, and when it feels like everything is falling apart. Lastly, you want to be able to do this with someone, or you want to feel like you're growing with someone. That's why having a tribe or a community or a group of people that are trying to aim for the same thing means you're more likely to get there. If you're trying to quit smoking, you can physically join a community or join a free community online like a Reddit or a Discord, which has people filled with the same problem as you, trying to make a change and reach that goal, which in turn will make you more likely to get to your destination faster. Incorporating and trying out all these tools will 100% get you to finally break any and every one of your bad habits. I mentioned earlier on how you should do a positive habit immediately after a bad habit execution. But how do you implement that consistently and successfully? Well, check out this deep dive where I'll show you the scientific system to do this positive habits consistently.